What happens when America's most fearless late-night host meets British royalty and absolutely refuses to pull his punches? Tonight, we're diving into the most shocking celebrity interview meltdown in television history, where Queen Camilla stormed off Stephen Colbert's show after a verbal battle that left the entire studio audience speechless. This wasn't just awkward small talk gone wrong. This was a full-blown confrontation that ended with security being called and one very angry queen. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what actually went down. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert had always been known for its hard-hitting political commentary and fearless celebrity interviews, but nothing could have prepared the production team for what was about to unfold. Queen Camilla had agreed to appear on the show as part of her American tour, promoting various charitable causes and attempting to soften her public image across the pond. What should have been a standard royal public relations exercise quickly devolved into the most intense television confrontation anyone had ever witnessed. Stephen Colbert walked onto his familiar set with his trademark confident swagger, the studio audience erupting in their usual enthusiastic applause. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that even the most seasoned audience members could sense. Colbert approached his desk with a slight smirk playing across his lips, the kind of expression that regular viewers knew meant he was about to deliver something absolutely devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colbert announced to his audience, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and barely contained mischief. "Tonight, we have a very special guest. She's traveled all the way from across the Atlantic to join us, and I promise you, this is going to be an interview you'll never forget. Please welcome Her Majesty, Queen Camilla." The audience applauded politely as Queen Camilla made her entrance, wearing an elegant navy blue dress suit and her signature pearl necklace. She moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades in the public eye. But there was something in her posture that suggested she was already on high alert. Perhaps her media team had warned her about Colbert's reputation for asking the questions other hosts wouldn't dare touch. Camilla settled into the guest chair with practiced royal composure, offering a polite smile to the audience before turning her attention to Colbert. The host leaned back in his chair, studying his guest with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. The studio lights cast dramatic shadows across both their faces, creating an almost cinematic tension that had the entire audience leaning forward in anticipation. "Your Majesty," Colbert began, his tone deceptively respectful. "Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I have to say, it's not every day we get actual royalty on the show. Usually, we just get people who think they're royalty, like certain former presidents." The audience chuckled at the obvious political jab, but Camilla's expression remained carefully neutral. She had clearly been briefed on Colbert's tendency to weave political commentary into every conversation, but she seemed determined to stay above the fray. "Thank you for having me, Stephen," she replied, her crisp British accent cutting through the studio atmosphere. "I'm delighted to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with your viewers about the important work we're doing with various charitable organizations." Colbert nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm, but his eyes held a glint that suggested he had no intention of sticking to safe charitable talking points. "Oh, absolutely. Charity work is incredibly important. But before we get to that, I'm curious about something. You've had quite the journey to get to where you are today, haven't you? I mean, going from being the other woman to becoming queen consort. That's quite the character arc." The studio fell completely silent. Even the audience members who had been casually chatting moments before were now focused entirely on the exchange unfolding before them. Camilla's polite smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered her composure. "I think that's a rather simplistic way to characterize a very complex situation," she responded, her voice maintaining its regal tone despite the obvious provocation. "My relationship with King Charles developed over many years, and we've both been through our share of difficulties and growth." Colbert leaned forward slightly, sensing weakness like a shark detecting blood in the water. "Oh, I'm sure it was complex. Particularly complex for Diana, I would imagine. I mean, she did famously say there were 3 people in her marriage. Mathematics was never my strong suit, but even I can figure out who that third person was." The audience gasped audibly. This wasn't the gentle ribbing they were accustomed to seeing on late-night television. This was a direct confrontation with one of the most sensitive subjects in modern royal history. Camilla's hands gripped the arms of her chair slightly tighter, and her carefully maintained expression began to show cracks of genuine irritation. I think you're being deliberately provocative, Camilla said, her voice carrying a warning edge that hadn't been there moments before. I came here to discuss meaningful work, not to rehash decades-old gossip and speculation. Gossip? Colbert repeated, his eyebrows shooting up in mock surprise. Your Majesty, I'm talking about one of the most documented royal scandals in modern history. Diana herself spoke about it in interviews watched by millions of people. Are you suggesting the Princess of Wales was spreading gossip about her own marriage? The tension in the studio was now so thick it could be cut with a knife. Camera operators were zooming in closer, sensing that they were capturing television gold. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching two powerful figures engage in a verbal battle that was quickly escalating beyond anything they had expected to witness. Camilla's royal training was clearly being pushed to its absolute limits. Her face had taken on a slight flush, and her voice, while still controlled, carried an unmistakable undercurrent of anger. I'm not going to be drawn into relitigating painful events from the past. Diana was a remarkable woman who deserves to be remembered for her contributions, not used as ammunition in your comedy show. Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, her obvious discomfort seemed to energize him further. You're absolutely right. Diana was remarkable. She was beloved by the entire world. Which makes me wonder, how does it feel knowing that most? People still see you as the woman who helped destroy that beloved princess's marriage? Does that keep you up at night? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Queen Camilla's carefully constructed public persona was beginning to crumble before the eyes of millions of viewers. Her hands had balled into fists, and her breathing had become noticeably more rapid. The woman who had spent years trying to rehabilitate her public image was watching it all fall apart on live television. The studio lights seemed to burn brighter as Queen Camilla processed the devastating question that had just been thrown at her. For a moment that felt like an eternity, she remained completely motionless. Her royal mask finally beginning to slip away completely. When she finally spoke, her voice had transformed from polite diplomatic courtesy into something much more dangerous. "How dare you?" she said quietly, but with such venom that several audience members actually shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You think you can reduce decades of my life, my relationships, my experiences into some cheap punchline for your American audience." Colbert had clearly struck a nerve. But instead of backing away, he doubled down with the ruthless precision that had made him one of television's most formidable interviewers. "I'm not reducing anything, Your Majesty. I'm simply asking about the elephant in the room that everyone else is too polite to mention. The entire world watched Diana struggle with depression, bulimia, and a crumbling marriage while you were, shall we say, providing comfort to her husband. I'm just wondering if you ever think about your role in all of that suffering." The words hit Camilla like physical blows. Her face had gone from flushed to completely pale, and her entire body language had shifted from regal composure to barely contained fury. The transformation was so complete that even veteran audience members who had seen countless celebrity meltdowns were shocked by the intensity of what they were witnessing. "My role," she repeated, her voice rising for the first time since the interview began. "You want to talk about roles? Let's talk about the role of a media that hounded that poor woman relentlessly, that turned her personal struggles into entertainment, that created impossible expectations, and then fed off her pain when she couldn't meet them." Colbert leaned back slightly, but his expression remained unflinchingly focused. "That's an interesting deflection, but it doesn't really answer my question. You were having an affair with a married man whose wife was publicly falling apart. Did you ever consider stepping back? Did you ever think about the damage being done? Stepping back." Camilla's voice cracked slightly, revealing years of suppressed emotion bubbling to the surface. "You think it was that simple? You think love and relationships and human connection can be turned on and off like a television program? Charles and I had a connection that went back decades before he even met Diana. We were torn apart by duty and expectation, forced into situations none of us wanted." The audience was completely riveted. This wasn't the carefully scripted royal appearance they had expected. This was raw, unfiltered human emotion from someone who had spent decades hiding behind protocol and public relations. Camera operators were capturing every micro-expression, every gesture, knowing they were documenting television history. Colbert pressed forward relentlessly. "So, you're saying Diana was just collateral damage in your great love story? That her suffering was acceptable as long as you and Charles got your happy ending? Don't you dare put words in my mouth," Camilla snapped, her composure now completely shattered. Diana's suffering was tragic, but it wasn't caused by me alone. She was dealing with mental health issues, eating disorders, the pressure of being in the public eye, a husband who was pushed into a marriage he wasn't ready for. The situation was complex beyond anything your simple American understanding can grasp. The studio erupted in shocked murmurs at the simple American understanding comment. Colbert's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory gleam that appeared whenever someone handed him perfect ammunition for his next attack. Simple American understanding, he repeated, his voice dripping with mock offense. Your Majesty, let me see if my simple American brain can work this out. Woman marries prince. Prince continues relationship with former girlfriend. Wife becomes depressed and ill. Former girlfriend eventually becomes queen. Did I miss anything? In my simple American analysis. Camilla was now visibly shaking with rage. Years of media training, decades of careful public image management. All of it was dissolving under the harsh studio lights. You're deliberately oversimplifying a situation that destroyed 3 lives. Do you think Charles wanted to hurt Diana? Do you think I wanted to be cast as the villain for the rest of my life? Do you think any of us chose this pain? But you did choose, Colbert countered without missing a beat. You chose to continue the relationship. You chose to be available when Charles needed comfort that he wasn't getting from his wife. You chose to participate in a situation that was tearing apart the most famous marriage in the world. Those were choices, Your Majesty. Own them. The word own seemed to trigger something primal in Camilla. She suddenly stood up from her chair, her entire body rigid with fury. The audience gasped collectively, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of royal television appearances. Own them, she practically shouted, her carefully modulated accent becoming more pronounced under stress. I've owned them every single day for 40 years. I've been vilified, threatened, attacked, and humiliated by people who know nothing about the reality of what happened. I've had my children threatened, my family harassed, my every move scrutinized and criticized. Colbert remained seated, but his posture suggested he was ready for anything. And yet you persisted, even knowing the cost to Diana, even knowing the cost to the monarchy's reputation, even knowing the cost to your own family. You persisted because what you wanted was more important than anyone else's well-being. Because I loved him, Camilla screamed, the words echoing through the stunned studio. Because sometimes in life, you can't control who you love or when you love them or how inconvenient that love is for everyone else. Because Charles was miserable and Diana was miserable. And yes, I was miserable too. But at least together, we could find some happiness in a situation that was impossible for everyone involved. The admission hung in the air. Like a confession. For the first time in the entire interview, Colbert seemed momentarily speechless. Perhaps surprised by the raw honesty he had managed to extract from someone so practiced in diplomatic evasion. But Camilla wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened and decades of suppressed frustration were pouring out. Camilla, you want to judge me? Fine. Judge me. But understand that every single person involved in that situation was trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Diana was pushed into a marriage with a man who was in love with someone else. Charles was forced to marry someone appropriate rather than someone he loved, and I was painted as the wicked stepmother in a fairy tale that was never going to have a happy ending for anyone. Colbert recovered his composure with practiced ease. Colbert. So you're the victim in this story, the woman who ended up with the crown, the palace, the title, and the man. You're actually the one we should feel sorry for. The question was like gasoline on a fire. Camilla's face contorted with rage as she realized she had been maneuvered into exactly the position Colbert had wanted her in from the beginning. Camilla's eyes blazed with an intensity that seemed to illuminate the entire studio. The question had struck at the very core of everything she had been fighting against for decades. Her breathing was rapid and shallow, her hands trembling with barely controlled rage as she processed the devastating accusation that had just been leveled against her. Camilla, whispering, "Dangerous victim," she repeated, her voice now a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. Camilla, you think this is about victimhood? You think wearing a crown makes up for 40 years of being the most hated woman in Britain? You think a title erases the death threats, the constant security concerns, the knowledge that half the world wishes I had never existed? Colbert sensed he was approaching the breaking point, but like a master interrogator, he pushed forward with surgical precision. Colbert, but you got what you wanted in the end, didn't you? Charles chose you over his wife, over his public image, over the stability of the monarchy itself. You won. So, why are you so angry? Camilla laughed bitterly, a sound that chilled everyone in the studio. Camilla, you think this is winning? Do you know what it's like to be married to someone and know that every time he looks at you, half the world sees a home wrecker? Do you know what it's like to walk into a room and watch conversations stop because people are wondering if you're worth all the destruction you supposedly caused? The audience was completely mesmerized. They were witnessing the complete psychological unraveling of one of the world's most carefully controlled public figures. Camera operators zoomed in closer, capturing every tear that threatened to spill from her eyes, every muscle that twitched with suppressed emotion. Colbert leaned forward, his voice taking on an almost therapeutic tone that somehow made his words even more cutting. Colbert, so you do feel guilty. You do think you caused destruction. After all these years of public relations campaigns and charity work and trying to rehabilitate your image, you still know in your heart that you helped destroy a fairy tale that millions of people believed in. Camilla, voice-cracking fairy tale. It was never a fairy tale. It was a disaster from the beginning. Diana was 19 years old, barely more than a child, thrust into a role she wasn't prepared for, with a man who was honest enough to tell her he didn't love her. The fairy tale was a lie sold to the public by people who needed a royal wedding to distract from their own failures. Colbert, pressing. And yet, you let that 19-year-old girl suffer alone while you provided comfort to her husband. You let her spiral into bulimia and depression while you were there for Charles whenever he needed you. How do you reconcile that with your conscience? The question seemed to break something fundamental inside Camilla. She began pacing behind her chair like a caged animal, her royal training completely abandoned. Camilla, my conscience? You want to talk about conscience? Where was everyone else's conscience when they were feeding that poor girl to the media wolves? Where was the palace's conscience when they refused to get her proper help? Where was the public's conscience when they demanded perfection from someone who was clearly struggling? Colbert, quietly, but you could have stepped away. At any point, you could have told Charles to work on his marriage, to get help for his wife, to be the husband Diana deserved. But you didn't. You stayed available, didn't you? The words hit their target with devastating accuracy. Camilla stopped pacing and turned to face Colbert directly, her face a mask of pure fury. Camilla, how dare you lecture me about stepping away? You make millions of dollars every year tearing apart public figures for entertainment. You've built your entire career on other people's pain and mistakes. At least my relationship with Charles was based on genuine love. What's your excuse for profiting off human misery? The studio fell into shocked silence. Camilla had turned the tables, attacking Colbert's own moral foundation with the kind of precision that came from years of enduring similar attacks. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might regain control of the interview, but Colbert was a master of his craft, and he recovered with lightning speed. Colbert, you're absolutely right, Your Majesty. I do make money off other people's pain. The difference is I don't pretend to be a moral authority. I don't wear a crown and expect people to bow to me. I don't demand respect while refusing to acknowledge the damage I've caused. I'm a comedian who makes fun of powerful people. You're a queen who helped destroy a princess. The comparison was so brutal, so perfectly calculated, that it seemed to physically stagger Camilla. She gripped the back of her chair for support, her face cycling through expressions of shock, rage, and something that looked almost like defeat. Camilla, barely audible, that's enough. I will not be subjected to this abuse any longer. This interview is over. Colbert, with mock disappointment. Oh, but we're just getting to the good part. I haven't even asked about the tampon phone call yet. The reference to one of the most embarrassing leaked conversations in royal history was the final straw. Camilla's face went completely white, then flushed red with a fury that seemed to consume her entirely. She began moving toward the exit, but Colbert wasn't finished. Your Majesty, surely you can defend your actions. Surely someone who fought so hard for love can explain why that love was worth destroying a marriage, traumatizing children, and ultimately contributing to Diana's tragic end. Camilla stopped dead in her tracks. When she turned around, her expression was one of pure, unadulterated hatred. You vile, despicable man, she hissed. How dare you suggest I had anything to do with Diana's death? How dare you use that tragedy to score points in your pathetic little comedy show? I'm not suggesting anything, Colbert replied calmly. I'm simply pointing out that Diana was emotionally destroyed by the situation you helped create, and that emotional destruction led to the choices that ultimately killed her. Cause and effect, Your Majesty. Even simple Americans can understand that. The studio erupted in chaos. Audience members were shouting, some in support of Camilla, others cheering Colbert's brutal honesty. Security personnel began moving toward the stage as Camilla completely lost control. "Security," she screamed. "Get me away from this monster. I will not tolerate this abuse. This is harassment. This is slander." But even as security approached, Colbert delivered his final devastating blow. "The truth isn't slander, Your Majesty. And the truth is that you chose your own happiness over everyone else's well-being. And you've spent decades trying to convince the world that makes you noble instead of selfish." Camilla let out a sound that was part scream, part sob, and lunged toward Colbert's desk. Security intervened just in time, gently but firmly escorting the queen toward the exit as she continued to shout accusations and threats. The studio audience was on their feet, some booing, some cheering, all of them knowing they had witnessed something unprecedented in television history. As Camilla disappeared through the exit, still screaming about lawsuits and diplomatic incidents, Colbert turned to his audience with the satisfied expression of someone who had just accomplished exactly what he set out to do. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, straightening his tie as if nothing unusual had happened. "Queen Camilla, everyone. I think she really opened up tonight, don't you?" The audience exploded in laughter and applause as the credits began to roll. But everyone knew they had witnessed something far more significant than comedy. They had seen the complete destruction of a carefully constructed public image. The brutal extraction of truth from someone who had spent decades hiding from it, and the kind of raw human drama that television producers dream about but rarely capture. This wasn't just an interview gone wrong. This was the moment when years of suppressed guilt, rage, and frustration finally exploded in the most public way possible, leaving everyone who witnessed it questioning everything they thought they knew about power, responsibility, and the price of getting what you want. So, what did you think about this incredible confrontation? Was Stephen Colbert too harsh, or was Queen Camilla finally held accountable for her actions? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking celebrity moments that you won't see anywhere else. What other royal scandal do you think deserves this kind of brutal examination?